Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Zombie Train. This is episode number 260. We are only a few episodes away from a route review now. We're getting ever closer. But I have a question that was not in a video, I believe. It was just sent to me directly, which don't do this. But it's about the Ginna Ginna, and Cook nuclear plants, which are two nuclear plants which I may have mentioned in a prior episode, but I don't know which one that would have been, and I don't, feel like going back. And they're mentionable because of the circumstances that surrounded them and how it mattered to us. Now, they're not all that far apart in the grand scheme of things. One is, sort of north of Michigan City, along Lake Michigan there. And the other one is along the coast of Lake Ontario. It's in Rochester. And so these two plants, I won't say they made the difference to us, but they were two very distinct sort of issues, or two very distinct and different circumstances, I suppose is the right word, that we came across. And I'm looking for where Ginna is on the map, and I think I found it. Because it's RJ and E. Yeah, there we go. Well, no, that says... That's the wrong one. That's a different one. I'm looking at the wrong one. Whatever. It's over here somewhere. It's along the coast. I never saw it myself. I only know that there was a not insignificant problem that happened. That, again, I don't know the specifics of, but I do know that it had some sort of fatal meltdown, I guess is the right word for it. I hesitate to call it that because it wasn't like a Chernobyl blows the roof off the place, but it was something. And this plant, so we came into Rochester, or we came south of Rochester because the line doesn't go directly. You don't have to go directly through, and we realized this, and so we went just to the south of Rochester. We were over by the airport, and we were doing a little scoping, and we heard sirens, we heard alarms, and we didn't realize what was going on, and, sort of instinctively, stupidly, we sent out a group of people to go and check out what was going on. We also didn't really know, we didn't know that the plant existed, we didn't know that the plant was there or operating or was under the circumstances that it was. Now, we realized, very quickly that, they went over there. Of course, all of the zombies were attracted to this place. And so they were able to go up on it fairly easily without rousing suspicion. And one individual who was not really a member of the main crew, who probably would have gotten a pretty stern talking to, had everything gone well anyways, he, dismounted the Jeep and managed to make his way into the plant, because all the zombies were very distracted, but they weren't distracted immediately with the building itself. They were distracted by alarms going off nearby. I don't know, or rather, I can assume that the reason there weren't alarms going off in the plant itself are because the alarms had been damaged in some form, in some way. It's not a high power plant. It's not, like I said, it's not Chernobyl by any means. But, and as well, it's also very, very small. It's one of the oldest, or it was one of the oldest that was still operating. And, it had just started leaking. It had started leaking radiation. And so this guy went in there, and he came out a little while later, and everyone's motioning him to come over here, come back to the Jeep, you idiot. And we get him back to the train. They bring him back to the train, and he's dying, basically. There's no other way to say it. I can't, go through and describe the symptoms of radiation poisoning. I don't think I need to, but he had been exposed to some significant doses by basically being an idiot and doing God knows what, clambering around inside of the reactor, or not the reactor itself, but inside of the power plant. In a place where the shielding was clearly damaged, or some pipe or something. There was something that had gone wrong, because he should have been okay, hypothetically, theoretically. He shouldn't have been dying of radiation sickness by the time he got out of the building, but by the time we got him back to the train, it was clear that was the case. And in one way, it's almost serendipitous that did happen, because there is a track that runs right through the middle of town. And we were scoping out Rochester, and we were looking at, some of the areas, and that's the track that really gets us closest to the water. And we were thinking of just seeing if we could bring the train down into there and then holding that little area. Now, obviously, we couldn't have because of the alarms and everything like that, but when we were coming up on it, we thought, maybe this is a good idea. Maybe we can get down there and, get a couple of boats or whatever, go across the water, because they're not too far from Toronto, and we didn't really want to go all the way up past Buffalo, to Niagara-on-the-Lake or whatever, or to drive the train all the way around. We kind of wanted to just get in something and, maybe grab some supplies from Toronto and bring them back to the train. So we were just figuring, we'll get close to the water, but we decided against that, and we ended up just going to Toronto. We just ended up taking the whole train over. This was a little ways in. We'd already gone by Rochester a couple of times. It wasn't like the first time through. It just happened to be. That time we noticed the alarms, and there was nothing that we could do about it. There was nothing that we were going to do to solve this radiation leak or whatever. We basically had to figure, we'll hope it'll burn itself out. We know there's not a lot of nuclear material in there anyways. It's not going to cause a gigantic mushroom cloud. I think the Toronto rail lines sent in some people and shut down the reactor, sort of on their own, motives, on their own time. So, problem solved with that. But it was the kind of thing where we then had to put out like a bulletin saying don't go to Rochester if you didn't need that already. And if you're going along the coast, don't stop here. Like the Toronto rail lines, again, because they are on Lake Ontario, they were kind of the go-to for laws on Lake Ontario. They were the ones that had to inform everyone, don't go near Rochester, don't go near the Ginna nuclear power plant. Now, that was the only nuclear disaster that we came across, and that's fairly small in terms of disaster. As far as disasters go, it wasn't even really anything. It killed our guy, which was unfortunate, but it's not like there were, bodies littered around it. It's not like the whole town was irradiated. It's just, if you don't climb inside the building, which was, attempted to be blocked off, so there must have been people there that figured out what was going on before us. I don't know, there were probably plenty of warning signs. The guy had a death wish. That's all I can assume. Now, on the flip side of everything, I've talked about nuclear power plants before being really good and useful in that they don't need a lot of maintenance. They don't need very much at all. They can just sort of keep operating. And that was basically powering Rochester for a while on its own. And, when we went through, we had power. We even used the radios in the airport at one point to get in contact with people. It was awesome and it was super duper useful. But the the thing that we ended up doing was, when we went through and we realized, oh, there's no power, what happened? And we were, sorry, not to get distracted again, but we were going to utilize the fact that that area had power to rebuild a small piece of the Falls Railroad in order to make it easier to get to Toronto from points east. Because otherwise you have to go through Buffalo and do this weird, janky, go through all this stuff and then go up to Niagara Falls, and it's kind of a pain in the butt. But we were going to do that, and then we realized, then Rochester became much less useful. The flip side of everything is the fact that over at the Cook plant, things were going strong, and moreover, there were a bunch of people there that wanted our attention, that wanted our help, and that were fully ready to accept as many survivors as we could throw at them, because they were trying to build some sort of new little settlement that was along the water, along the coast, along the plant there. And it's a lot of flat area, which, as I've talked about, is dangerous. But there's a couple of little landing strips nearby, so you can get people in by plane. There's the Grand Rapids subdivision, which we came in because they flagged us down in Michigan City and told us to come up. Which they flagged us down. They stopped us using signals because they could get power to them, and then they came over when they realized that somebody was in the block, which is cool and very, they really thought their plan out. I gotta give them props. But they were ready to to bring people in, and they started just expanding into the flat areas outside. And so we sort of say, okay, yeah, cool, we'll trade with you guys, we'll bring you survivors, you guys are awesome. We can really negotiate something here. And so they start taking in survivors and building houses and, doing whatever, except they don't really prepare for, the inevitable, basically. They didn't sit around and figure out, okay, hey, this is what we're going to do when the zombies inevitably show up. They didn't plan that. They didn't figure it out. And so I was, somehow unsurprised that I heard that they got swamped with this giant horde, and it basically forced them off the mainland and into boats. And, we came back, and there was nothing wrong with the plant, and there were still quite a few people alive. Like I said, they were living in boats. A lot of them actually, ended up going all the way north and around through Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and over to Toronto. Or, the Toronto rail lines picked them up somewhere. But we came back to the Cook plant, and there was maybe twice as many people as they started with when we were originally there, and it was sort of like okay, I guess you guys are all right now. Basically, don't be that arrogant. You have to build defenses, and they listened, but they didn't build a large enough area. And so they ended up with this weird sort of nuclear-powered water world where they brought in a bunch of ships that they knew they weren't going to get fuel for, and they just docked them and anchored them and tied them together, and they had this almost like a floating city. And it was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen. And at the same time, it was I got this bad feeling. And it wasn't the reactor that was the problem. It was the fact that they were using some of these ships and they were just building on them. And, one of these in particular, one of these larger ships, that must have been an ore carrier or something, is in there in the middle of the group and is not being paid enough attention and springs a leak and goes down and almost drags half the settlement along with it. Thankfully, they were on the jump, and they were able to detach the biggest cables that were tying it to the other ships nearby. But it gets in the water, and it settles to the bottom, and the water is not that deep there, I'm pretty sure, because I distinctly remember going back there, visiting the place, and this wasn't even that long ago. This was, fairly recently in all real terms. because this is, I'm explaining this evolution of this place over generations almost, through the entire war and then beyond. And, fairly recently I must have gone back there because I distinctly remember this image of all these boats clustered around, and they're all tied together, and then there's just this hole in the middle with a bridge sticking out of it, the top of a ship just, sticking a couple stories of it above the water. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video, Train Man.